Tonight, you'll discover a powerful illusion hiding in plain sight, one that lets people feel brilliant while being absolutely wrong. Hey guys, tonight we start with a man who thought lemon juice could make him invisible. Yes, really. You probably won't survive this kind of confidence, but he did. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a Pittsburgh bank on a quiet spring day in 1995. You're not there to make a deposit, you're there to rob the place. But here's the twist, you're convinced the security cameras can't see you. Why? Because your face is covered in lemon juice. This is not a hypothetical. This was MacArthur Wheeler, a man so confident in his homemade invisibility cloak that he smiled at every camera while stealing cash. When the police showed up later with grainy footage of his very visible face, Wheeler was stunned. "But I wore the juice," he protested, genuinely shocked that his logic had failed him. It turns out, lemon juice does help create invisible ink. It does not, however, cloak your identity from surveillance equipment. This spectacular lapse of reasoning didn't just land Wheeler behind bars. It lit a spark in a psychologist named David Dunning. You sit back, wondering how someone can be that wrong and still that confident. And then Dunning asks himself, wait, how many of us are walking around with lemon juice on our faces, metaphorically speaking? You see, Wheeler's case wasn't about low intelligence. It was about a specific kind of blind spot. Dunning teamed up with Dunning-Kruger, and they launched a series of studies that led to a now famous insight. The people who perform the worst in any given task are usually the worst at recognizing how badly they're doing. So here's the sting. It's not just that they don't know, it's that they don't know they don't know. And you've probably been there too, whether it was overestimating your driving skills, your memory of high school algebra, or your karaoke abilities after 2 drinks, you felt smarter than you actually were. The funny thing, Dunning and Kruger didn't start with lemon juice or bank heists. They started with humor tests. They had participants rate how funny jokes were and compare their results to others. Turns out, the worst performers consistently thought they were in the top half. And the top performers? They thought they were average. It's like being on stage bombing a comedy routine while still believing you're killing it, because you can't hear the silence through your own ego. Historians still argue whether Socrates' famous line, "I know that I know nothing," was an act of strategic modesty or a profound philosophical truth. Either way, it aged better than Wheeler's lemon juice. The psychological twist here is known as metacognition, your ability to think about your thinking. When you're bad at something, you're also bad at noticing how bad you are. It's like trying to detect color blindness using only your own eyes. You don't know what you're missing because you're missing the very tools to see it. So imagine this. You're sitting in a room full of people discussing, say, climate science. One guy loudly explains how it's all a hoax because he read a blog once. Another stays quiet, a climate researcher who spent 20 years studying global weather systems. Guess which one has doubts? The expert? Because the more you know, the more you realize how little you understand. That brings us back to our friend MacArthur. He wasn't just confident, he was certain. And that kind of certainty is intoxicating. When you're wearing lemon juice on your face, figuratively of course, it's not that you ignore the truth, it's that you truly can't see it, and you're not immune. That's the Dunning-Kruger trap. When you think you're above it, you're already in it. Maybe not in the lemon juice wearing bank robbing kind of way, but maybe in your assumptions, your quick judgments, your certainty in areas where you've never even peeked at the data. We all walk around with blind spots. The difference is, some of us think we've got 20/20 vision while driving through fog. Just like that, you start to realize that the people who argue loudest, the ones who declare they're experts with no training, may not be anomalies. They might just be prototypes. Lemon juice heroes marching forward with unearned certainty. But it's not just individual folly. This phenomenon stretches beyond Wheeler. It's your boss who gives a presentation on a topic they don't understand. It's your cousin who watched a 5-minute video and now thinks they're a medical expert. It's that guy online, Yes, that guy, who posts paragraph-long rants about legal systems he's never studied, world history he vaguely remembers from high school, and nutrition advice he got from a meme. Still, you might laugh at them, but the smarter move? Realize you're probably them sometimes too. Because if MacArthur Wheeler taught us anything, it's that certainty without insight is dangerous. And lemon juice only hides ink, not your flaws. You settle deeper under the covers, because now it's time to explore something even more unsettling than a man robbing banks in citrus camouflage. It's the creeping realization that sometimes the people who seem the most confident are actually the most clueless. And worse, sometimes that person is you. You've met them at work, at dinner, in the comments section of literally anything on the internet. They argue with an unwavering tone, toss out facts with the flourish of a magician, and seem allergic to the phrase, "Maybe I'm wrong." You listen, nod, and think, surely they know what they're talking about. But underneath all that confidence, a hollow echo. This is the heart of the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's not about being dumb, it's about being unaware. And that's a far sneakier danger. The effect explains how people with the lowest ability in a domain not only perform poorly, they're also the least likely to recognize their own lack of skill. It's like walking into a chess tournament, knocking over the board, and declaring checkmate. This happens because the same skills that make you good at something are often the skills needed to judge it accurately. If you don't know how good writing works, you probably also can't tell when your writing is bad. If you're unfamiliar with musical theory, you might believe your off-key rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody is Grammy-worthy. And if you don't know the first thing about economics, you might have strong, unshakable opinions on the global market, fueled entirely by vibes. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon showed up in ancient teachings or if it's a byproduct of modern information overload. But if you ask Plato, he'd say the real wisdom is knowing what you don't know. Socrates would just sip his wine and nod approvingly from the afterlife. There's also a fun little twist here. Your brain rewards you for this overconfidence. When you succeed, you feel proud. When you fail, you tell yourself it wasn't your fault. You blame the questions, the conditions, the vibe in the room. Rarely do you think, maybe I'm just not good at this. Your brain, ever the loyal hype man, filters the evidence, hugs your ego, and whispers it's everyone else who's wrong. You see this most clearly in how people rate themselves. When researchers asked participants to evaluate their own grammar, logic, and even sense of humor, those in the bottom quartile routinely ranked themselves above average. Meanwhile, the top performers underestimated their standing. It's like a talent show where the worst singer belts out their heart and walks off stage beaming, while the actual virtuoso fidgets nervously, convinced they could have done better. You've been there. Maybe during a group project when someone steamrolled the plan with terrible ideas, confidently citing their own brilliance. Maybe you were that someone once. Maybe your browser history contains a search like how to become an expert overnight. No shame. We've all flirted with delusion when self-esteem needed a date. This is where things get interesting, because it's not just that overconfident people are loud, it's that they are convincing, even to themselves, and that's dangerous. It turns debates into monologues, learning opportunities into TED Talks no one asked for. It creates echo chambers in classrooms, boardrooms, and digital rooms where the loudest wins, not the wisest. Quirkier still, studies show that when people with low competence are shown their actual performance compared to others, they still believe the results are wrong. They double down. Denial is their cozy sweater. The idea that they might not be great, too uncomfortable to wear. And here's the kicker. If you're thinking, well, I'm definitely not like that, you might want to pause. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect hides best in those who don't believe they're affected by it. Your certainty becomes the mask that keeps you from seeing your own blind spots. Meanwhile, truly skilled individuals tend to be haunted by doubt. Why? Because they see the vastness of what they don't yet know. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is. It's like opening a door and finding not a room, but a whole forest. You take one step in and already you're lost in the complexity. So what do you do with this knowledge? First, you stop assuming that confidence equals competence. It doesn't. Sometimes the quiet one in the room knows more than everyone else combined. Sometimes the person fumbling their words has the deepest understanding, but lacks the certainty to bulldoze others. And second, you reflect. Ask yourself, where do I think I'm smarter than I really am? Not to shame yourself, but to gently tug back the curtain of illusion, because the only thing worse than being wrong is being too confident to notice. If you're feeling a little uncertain now, good, that's the point. A sprinkle of self-doubt is a sign you're waking up, and in a world full of people shouting their truths, the ones who whisper I could be wrong might just be the ones worth listening to. Section 3, you breathe a little slower now, sinking into the rhythm of uncertainty, where answers blur and overconfidence takes a seat in the back row. And just as you start to feel comfortable in your newfound awareness, here comes a curve, one shaped like a mountain, followed by a very deep dip. Imagine a chart, not a boring spreadsheet, but a winding landscape that maps the journey from ignorance to mastery. At the far left, you start at zero, no knowledge, no experience. As you learn just a little, your confidence shoots up like a rocket. You feel like a genius. You've read 2 articles and suddenly you're ready to write a book. Welcome to Mount Stupid. Mount Stupid is a dangerous place. It's where you stand tall and proud, armed with half-truths and quarter-baked understanding. You've just started learning, but the brain tricks you into thinking you've seen the whole picture. And up there, the air is thin, the perspective warped, and your megaphone works better than it should. But knowledge is a strange terrain. Take one more step beyond Mount Stupid, and suddenly, everything you thought you knew collapses under your feet. The facts grow fuzzy. The patterns unravel. You realize the subject isn't a puzzle, it's a labyrinth. That's when you tumble straight into the valley of despair. Historians still argue whether early Greek thinkers believed in such cognitive journeys, or if this metaphor is more of a modern self-help darling. Either way, the image sticks. In the valley, you feel defeated, you question your abilities, your self-confidence flatlines. But oddly enough, this is progress. Because from this low point, something rare happens. You begin to learn with humility. You stop pretending, you start listening. You slowly make your way up a new slope, not steep, not dramatic, but real. This is the slope of enlightenment. It's not flashy. There are no medals for climbing it, just late nights, honest feedback, and small realizations that whisper, maybe I was wrong. Here, confidence grows, but only as skill does. And eventually you reach what psychologists call the plateau of sustainability, a flat, steady place where your confidence finally aligns with your competence. It's a boring place, honestly. No fireworks, but it's where the real experts live. They don't shout, they don't need to. They've traded loud certainty for quiet mastery, and sometimes they even doubt themselves. Not because they're unsure, but because they know how complex things really are. You've probably seen this curve in action. Maybe you tried to learn a new language. At first you learned a few words and felt unstoppable. You walked into a restaurant and ordered with flair. Then someone replied, and suddenly you were drowning. You mispronounced the soup. You nodded when asked if you wanted your eggs raw. Welcome to the valley. Or maybe you started a hobby, photography, cooking, coding. The first few wins made you feel like a prodigy, but soon the gaps appeared. The missed focus, the burnt onions, the errors that refused to vanish. That's where most people quit. Because the valley hurts, it's embarrassing, and Mount Stupid, for all its foolishness, at least felt good. But here's the thing. The valley is where learning happens. It's where humility is born. It's where people stop performing and start absorbing. And while it's funny to mock Mount Stupid, there's something human about it. It's the optimism of beginning. The spark that says I can do this before you understand how hard it actually is. It's a little naive, but also brave. So don't be too harsh on those who are still waving from the peak. We've all been there. Some of us are still waving and just don't know it yet. Quirky fact, during the 1600s, English physicians believed in the theory of the 4 humors. That your body's health depended on a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Doctors were deeply confident in their leech-based treatments. Looking back, it's laughable. But at the time, they were at the top of Mount Stupid, armed with the latest science and a whole bucket of bloodletting. And now, centuries later, you might wonder, what are today's leeches? What beliefs are we certain of now, only to be proven spectacularly wrong later? That's the haunting beauty of this curve. It applies to everything, from personal skills to politics, from science to relationships. Wherever learning exists, Mount Stupid looms. So does the valley. And if you're lucky, or stubborn enough, you'll find the slope on the other side, but no one climbs alone. The plateau of sustainability isn't reached by effort alone. You need mentors. You need mistakes. You need to be wrong over and over until your brain learns to whisper instead of shout. So next time someone acts like an expert, you might ask, are they at the top of the mountain or walking quietly in the valley? And more importantly, where are you? You exhale as the fog begins to lift. But just as you start to enjoy the gentle rhythm of understanding, the world barges in, loud, urgent, and entirely convinced of itself. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just live inside awkward moments or innocent mistakes. Sometimes it takes the wheel, and sometimes it crashes the car. Let's start in the operating room, a place where confidence can be fatal. Studies have shown that medical students with the lowest skill levels are often the most confident in their diagnoses. These aren't harmless missteps. In one study, doctors who were most certain about their conclusions weren't more accurate than their peers. They were just less likely to double-check, consult, or ask for help. Because why would you second-guess yourself when you're so clearly right? You can almost hear them saying it. I just have a good instinct for these things. That's not intuition. That's the lemon juice talking. Even in aviation, an industry built on checklists and caution, overconfidence can sneak in. There are documented cases of pilots ignoring warning signs because they believed they could fix things manually. Historians still argue whether certain famous crashes were caused more by mechanical failure or by human pride pressing the wrong button. But let's step out of the cockpit and into the office. Picture the coworker who insists their way is the best way, even though their track record is littered with half-finished projects and bold predictions that aged like milk. They don't learn from feedback. They weaponize it. They hear criticism as noise, not guidance. And somehow, they still get promoted. Welcome to confidence cascades. It's when people high in confidence and low in actual skill are rewarded for seeming sure. Over time, whole organizations begin to confuse certainty with competence. The loudest person becomes the leader. The quietest person becomes invisible. It's not that anyone planned it that way, it just happens. One small reward for bravado, then another and another, until the culture itself starts climbing Mount Stupid with a flag. Even in classrooms, the effect shows up. A student who knows just enough to sound clever might dominate discussions, while a quieter student, brimming with nuance and insight, hesitates to speak. Teachers are trained to see past this, but systems aren't perfect. And when grades start rewarding showmanship, the cycle deepens. Let's not even talk about the internet, or rather, let's definitely talk about it. Because here's where the Dunning-Kruger effect throws a parade. On social media, everyone's an expert, nutritionists with no training, economists who've never seen a balance sheet, climate scientists who learned everything from a meme. Algorithms favor boldness. Engagement rewards confidence. The louder you are, the more visible you become. And here's the quirk. A 2013 study found that people who were wrong on factual questions tended to be more confident in their answers than those who were right. Because knowing less gives you fewer reasons to doubt yourself, and no one doubts themselves mid-tweet. One fringe tidbit, there was once a Facebook group dedicated entirely to proving the Earth is flat, while also organizing meetups around the globe. Yes, they used the word globe. But it's easy to laugh until you realize this overconfidence doesn't just confuse, it convinces. When someone sounds certain, we believe them, especially if we're tired, distracted, or unsure ourselves. And that's when the Dunning-Kruger effect becomes not just a bias, but a threat. Politics? Oh, you knew we were going there. Some of the loudest voices on complex policy issues often have the weakest grasp of the underlying systems. Historians still argue whether the rise of populism is a direct symptom of this, or simply a recurring pattern in times of uncertainty. But one thing is clear: when people feel overwhelmed, they seek confident answers, even if those answers are wrong. And here's the darkest part. People with genuine expertise tend to speak with hesitation, acknowledging nuance and uncertainty. But nuance doesn't trend. Uncertainty doesn't get retweeted. So the person saying "I'm not entirely sure" loses to the person yelling "This is the truth." You've seen it. You've maybe even done it. You've clicked on a video, nodded along with someone who made everything seem so obvious. You felt smarter for agreeing. You might not have asked, do they actually know what they're talking about? The Dunning-Kruger effect thrives in places where speed matters more than accuracy, where appearances matter more than depth, and where being right takes a backseat to sounding right. So what do you do when the world seems built for overconfidence? You slow down. You listen for the cracks behind certainty. You notice who admits they don't have all the answers. You pay attention not just to what's said, but how it's said. And most of all, you remember, volume is not the same as value. Confidence is not the same as competence. And the person wearing the lemon juice might still be running the meeting. You stretch slightly, just enough to loosen the grip of that last thought. But the story's not done, because behind every confident misstep lies something deeper. Culture? Not just the society you live in, but the ideas you breathe without even noticing. The way you were taught to measure yourself, to speak up, or stay quiet. Here's something strange. In the United States, studies consistently show that most people think they're above average. Not just in driving, which, let's face it, is a global delusion, but in intelligence, leadership, attractiveness, you name it. Apparently, the average American is better than average at everything. Statistically, impossible, but culturally, inevitable. From kindergarten, you're told to believe in yourself, to speak boldly, to share your thoughts, even when you're not quite sure. Confidence is celebrated, self-promotion is seen as ambition, and hesitation, often mistaken for weakness. It's not arrogance, not always. It's conditioning. A quiet push towards self-assuredness that seeps into everything, from job interviews to first dates to graduation speeches. Historians still argue whether this cultural tone was shaped more by post-war prosperity or the individualist roots of American identity. But what's clear is that it changes how people estimate their own knowledge. Overestimation isn't a bug, it's practically a feature. Now cross the ocean. In Japan, students consistently rank themselves lower than their actual ability. They apologize for acing tests. They downplay their strengths. A student who's the best in class might shrug and say, "I got lucky." Not because they believe it, but because humility is the expected mask. In collectivist cultures, harmony matters. Standing out, especially with loud confidence, can feel like a breach. Self-criticism isn't a flaw, it's etiquette. So when researchers bring the Dunning-Kruger study overseas, the results shift. The effect still exists, no culture is immune, but it looks different, less loud, more internal. You sit with that contrast. Two people, same skill. One says I nailed it, the other says I could have done better, and both are products of the water they've been swimming in. Even within cultures, subgroups show variation. Gender norms, class expectations, educational systems, they all nudge the confidence dial. For instance, in some studies, women tend to underestimate their performance, even when it matches or exceeds that of their male peers. Not because they believe they're less capable, but because they've learned to speak with caution, not certainty. Meanwhile, certain industries cultivate their own confidence cultures. Tech, finance, sales, you're expected to pitch, perform, dominate the conversation. Quiet reflection doesn't close deals. But that doesn't mean the loudest person in the room is the smartest, just the most rehearsed. Quirky side note, there's a real university course in Sweden where students learn how to sound confident without actually changing their expertise. It's called strategic communication. Yes, confidence can be taught. The question is, should it? Because confidence without competence still leads us right back to Mount Stupid. But the cultural twist doesn't end there. In some tribal communities in Papua New Guinea, speaking about yourself with any kind of pride is frowned upon. The emphasis is on contribution, not identity. You are what you do for others, not how loudly you say you're good at it. Imagine dropping a motivational Instagram quote there. It would probably get you quietly removed from the campfire. So what happens when all these cultural threads get tangled together on the internet? Where East meets West, introverts meet influencers, and everyone's yelling into the same digital room, you get noise. You get people who mistake visibility for credibility. You get algorithms that reward hot takes over thoughtful silence. And you get millions of people estimating their own knowledge through the lens of likes, shares, and retweets. The Dunning-Kruger Effect thrives here not just because of ignorance, but because the structure of the platforms rewards performance over precision. But here's the good news. Culture cuts both ways. Just as it can encourage overconfidence, it can also teach reflection, self-awareness, intellectual humility. You start by noticing. When someone seems overly sure, you pause. When someone seems unsure but thoughtful, you lean in. You make room for doubt, in yourself, in others. Because the real danger isn't being wrong. It's being so sure you're right that you stop learning. So next time you feel that rush of "I know this," ask where that feeling comes from. Is it experience, study, or just the comfort of a familiar opinion wrapped in the warmth of cultural approval? Confidence isn't bad, but when it's untethered from reality, it floats. And floating things drift, often far from the truth. You close your eyes for a moment, but the journey isn't quite over. Because now that you've seen the mountain, trudged through the valley, and watched the world reward its loudest minds, it's time to turn inward, toward the only place where this illusion can be undone. Your own mind. So how do you train your brain to know that it doesn't know? First, you accept the hardest truth of all. That the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't something other people have. It's something you have. That we all have. It's not a flaw in the system, it is the system. The way your brain makes sense of limited information is by patching the holes with misplaced confidence. And once you see that, you start doing something radical. You stop assuming you're right. Start by inviting feedback, not vague encouragement. Real, uncomfortable, ego-poking feedback from people who know more than you. From people who don't care about sparing your feelings. It stings, but sting is the currency of growth. And here's the twist. Most people avoid feedback not because they fear being wrong, but because they fear the identity crisis that follows. If I'm not good at this, then who am I? But the truth is, you are not your competence. You are the person who can improve their competence. If you let yourself, deliberate practice also matters. It's not just repetition, it's repetition with awareness. You try, fail, reflect. You study the gap between what you thought and what actually happened. You resist the temptation to blame the test, the system, or the weather. You ask instead, what did I miss? Historians still argue whether Socratic humility was ever meant as a learning tool or just an annoying party trick. But either way, it works. When you say "I don't know" with sincerity, you crack open a door. One that leads to richer understanding and fewer lemon juice disasters. There's another skill, metacognition. Thinking about your thinking. It's weird, it's uncomfortable, but it's powerful. You start noticing patterns. When you shut down new ideas, when you dismiss people who know more, when you explain something you don't fully understand as if you're a tenured professor. And instead of pushing forward, you pause, you correct, you shrink just a little. Quirky fact. Some chess grandmasters have been found to underestimate their moves more than amateurs overestimate theirs. Because mastery brings with it a constant awareness of fragility, of how easily a good position can collapse. It's the kind of wisdom you only earn after losing games you thought you were winning. But here's the soft magic. Over time, the gap between your confidence and your competence shrinks. Not because you believe in yourself less, but because you believe in better tools. In better habits, in better questions. You start using language like "I think" instead of "I know." You say "let me check" instead of "trust me." You get comfortable with uncertainty, and uncertainty becomes your quiet superpower. In a world that moves too fast, where people shout and argue and declare truths they barely understand, your restraint becomes radical. Your curiosity becomes rare, and your humility becomes magnetic. Even your mistakes change. They go from being embarrassing to being enlightening. You stop hiding them. You start mining them. You ask, what did this teach me about myself? That's where the real transformation lives. Because the goal isn't to never be wrong. The goal is to know when you're wrong quickly enough to do something about it. And here's the gentlest truth of all. Most people don't overestimate themselves because they're arrogant. They do it because they're scared. Because uncertainty feels like weakness. Because pretending feels safer than admitting confusion. But you can do better. You can slow down, ask more questions, Sit longer with complexity. You can leave Mount Stupid and keep walking, and eventually you'll reach a quiet, sustainable place where confidence doesn't need volume, where knowledge walks hand in hand with wonder, and where every I don't know becomes the start of something beautiful. So now, as you drift deeper into sleep, let all that noise, those confident voices, those certain answers, fade into the background. Picture them dissolving into the hum of a distant fan. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts unravel like soft threads pulling loose from the seams. You don't need to know everything. You only need to know that you're learning, that your questions matter more than your answers, that wisdom lives in the quiet. And tonight, in that quiet, you are safe. You are growing, and you are exactly where you need to be.